One. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Coffee with Cory. I'm your host, Cory Smith, here with Brian Geisinger. BG, we're going to talk some men's basketball. NC State, we talked about, the previous game, obviously Ole Miss finally getting, a P4 high major, whichever one you want to call it, out of the way. Obviously some good wins for NC State in non-conference play. Boise State, VCU, we'll see how well Liberty holds up, especially after they just beat Dayton this past week. But we'll break down non-conference. We'll look ahead to where they're headed in the ACC. But first of all, before we jump into things, man, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I don't have coffee. I've got a cup of tea, but I've got a little Christmas mug going here too. I'm doing well. I've really enjoyed the first 2 months of the season, covering college hoops here in the ACC specifically. And I think some interesting things to sort of touch on with State as they're in the holiday break here, 10 days in between games before they pick up with ACC play against Wake Forest. And I think a lot of stuff still on the table for them. And you sort of touched on it too. I think there's been a fair amount of hand wringing with them so far this season. Maybe not perhaps, worthy to an extent. I think even some of that's been sort of like, internally, Will Wade's spoken pretty openly about some of this stuff with the media, but they have 5, top 100 wins or borderline top 100 wins. UAB and Liberty are right there, and they've got 3 for now, top 60 wins. It kind of feels like Ole Miss is poised to slip out of that sort of arbitrary ranking that I'm going with here, but still some decent wins on the resume. This team is top 20 in offense, top 40 in defense. So still a lot to play for and reasons, I think, to be, optimistic to a certain extent with them going forward.
Yeah. And again, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about this team. Number one, the offense has been good all year, and the defense, which we'll talk about, over the past like 4 or 5 games, has really picked up. In particular, from not just stopping teams from scoring, but being able to force turnovers at times and being able to, get things going on that end, because that leads to better offense for NC State too. And it's something that kind of plagued NC State early on, where it wasn't always the defense. Sometimes it was just poor shot selection leading to easy transition buckets for the opposing team. But we'll discuss all of that. I want to remind our listeners, if you're watching this on YouTube, first of all, this was pre-recorded, so I apologize for not being able to comment on it. We'll post it at noon, but this was pre-recorded. So anybody who's watching this, if you want to jump on with us when we go live, or anytime you want to watch our videos, if you're watching this on our new YouTube page, make sure that you hit like, subscribe, hit get notifications, so that you guys can get notifications each and every single time we go live with these, whether it's a Coffee with Cory, a post-game podcast, pre-game podcast, our Monday podcast that we'll get back to soon, after the Christmas break and things like that. But do make sure that you do hit like, subscribe, get notifications. And, as always, I want to promote our website too. Head over to the NC State 24/7 Sports site to subscribe. That goes through the end of, it's 50% off through the end of the month of December. So do make sure that you check that out. Again, that's 6 months absolutely free. I keep kind of promoting it. It's December 23rd. If you're looking for a last minute gift for an NC State fan in your life, you can get them a subscription to our website as well. So do make sure that you check that out. All right, Brian, let's jump into the basketball here. As you mentioned, the last 2 months have been kind of up and down for NC State. Will Wade said after the game on Sunday against Ole Miss, 9-4 is not what he was hoping for. He was hoping to get to at least 10 wins. You want to have double-digit wins in non-conference play heading into the month of January, or in this case, December 31st for the men's basketball, side of things to start ACC play. But, a good start. Again, like you mentioned, a couple good wins for NC State, Boise State, Liberty, and then obviously Ole Miss, VCU. We'll see how well Ole Miss tracks. I think the other 3 might actually track as better wins. Just one of them happens to be a neutral court situation. So as long as Ole Miss stays, around inside the top 100, then it'll still be a Q2 win. And I think they will stay there because you're going to play good competition in the SEC, whether you win or lose. They'll still be a good team in the net somewhere around there. But just your thoughts in particular on the offensive side of the basketball, where NC State has, been good, where they can get better. Obviously, you think early on, Darian Williams really going off, and it really hasn't been him here lately. It's been more of Quadir Copeland. Just your thoughts on where NC State has been good and where they can get better on the offensive side of the basketball.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of positives on that side of the floor for them so far, but they have levels to get to in terms of like really optimizing and I think figuring out what they want this to look like, how the ball handling distribution will settle into, what the guard rotation might settle into. And also, I think there's been potentially like maybe a noticeable shift in the front court rotation too, with, Arsenault and Dang not playing in the Ole Miss game and going to more of the double big lineup with Sagne and Lubin playing together. From an individual perspective, Paul McNeil's had a great start to the season. Van Allen Lubin has looked great. Quadir Copeland is, back in the ACC and had putting up huge numbers, 26% assist rate, 26% usage, 38% assist rate, 54% shooting on threes, 61% shooting on twos. He gets to the line a lot, high free throw attempt rate. So I think if anything, maybe there's just been a lot of Copeland so far. And I am kind of curious to see if they can route some of that playmaking distribution more through Williams, who's hovering at about 23.5% usage rate, which is not a bad number. I think Darian has had an okay start to the season, but with injuries and with some sort of performances that maybe left you searching, hoping for a little bit more. I think he hopefully is in line for sort of a larger share of the offense moving forward. And to me, there are like real easy, obvious ways to kind of get to it. I've talked about this a lot, but more inverted pick and roll with Williams handling the ball and McNeil or Copeland or Holloman or Breed screening for him. You can use Darian in an infinite number of ways on offense because he's so skilled and because he can shoot from deep. He could be a mismatch guy, at the forward spot. So I think there are a lot of creative ways to get into actions with him. But really, I'd be looking for even more on-ball initiation from him because I think he's a guy that can just simplify stuff for State's offense when it kind of gets into like a rock fight in the half court. Just his ability to force double teams, to force teams to put two on the ball is a way to open up catch and shoots for Paul McNeil, for Matthew Abel, for cut finishes for guys like Van Allen Lubin and Quadir Copeland. So I kind of would like to see a little bit more of that moving forward. But overall, like, I think it's hard to argue too much with the offense. Like, they're top 20 in offensive efficiency. They're top 20 in effective field goal percentage. They're top 25 in turnover rate. They're top 20 in 3-point percentage, 39%. They're inside the top 55 in terms of 2-point percentage. They're inside the top 55 in terms of 3-point attempt rate. Like, this is a team, they play fast. They've got a balanced offense. They've got multiple guys that can initiate pick and roll and distribute and play make out of that. They've got, playmaking 5 with Lubin that can put it on the deck, that can face up, can initiate 5-out action. We've seen a fair amount of 5-out with State so far this season. And then to have a sort of like a movement shooting piece like McNeil that can really be like a ceiling raiser for State's offense when he gets hot, setting screens, slipping out, relocating around the arc, coming off of down screens. Even if you're not fully studying this offense and clipping all of their plays and doing all that, those sorts of things, I think you can just see that there's more spacing, more off-ball movement with this unit than there was in the Kevin Keatts era too. And Keatts built plenty of high-powered offenses. He just did it in a different fashion. This is a more intricate system with a lot of different stuff going on in it. And I think there's reasons to feel like this is stable. Like this is an offense that should be really good and efficient throughout the season. Maybe the 3-point percentage comes down a little bit. Like maybe they don't shoot quite 39% all season. I think that's maybe if you're like trying to like knock them, that's one of the things. Like maybe there's some regression there, and maybe they never quite figure out like the exact playmaking sort of like distribution, like how that should flow between Copeland and Holloman and in Williams, along with all the 5-out stuff that they do with Lubin too. But assuming they can like continue to smooth that, work on that, and keep the 3-point number at a decent clip, then I feel pretty confident in this team, like being, a top 25 offense throughout the season, because they've got a lot of talent. They play with good pace. They take good shots, and they've got guys that can just like interact well with one another as screeners and off-ball actions too. So I think there's reasons to be bullish on this team on that side of the floor. And again, my hope for them would just be finding more ways to get Williams, on the edges of the defense, opposing defenses, in those pistol actions, in those inverted ball screens, and trying to get 2 on the ball and spray out from there.
Yeah, and it's funny you were bringing up all of the all of the different ratings and things like that for NC State. Number one, I would point out, by the way, the strength of schedule rating for non-conference play. We're at the end, and it can still change a little bit because as these teams improve or as they play in conference, if they get better, then it can could potentially move it up inside the top 50 or something along those lines. But we probably won't see a ton of change because it was 61st in the country. Like that's not a bad place to be. I mean, like UNC was 169 overall. That's just based off of the full amount of teams they played, and then Duke ended up at 53. So Duke ended up just barely ahead of NC State based off of the KenPom ratings, but that's because of the fact that they played so many top 25 teams, and it probably helps too to win some of those games against top 25 teams as well.
Definitely. And Duke will have Michigan late in the season too. That will also like boost. That, I mean, that's going to be, it's a neutral site game in DC, but that's another one that will also, like, I'm sure, notch up the Duke's, non-con strength of schedule too. Yeah. But they're comparable right now, and that says something. Obviously Duke lost its first game with, sort of like seeing a big lead get erased on the road against Tech a couple of days ago. But again, State's played a tough schedule, having to go out to Maui, go down to Auburn, Kansas at home. Like it's definitely been after like a very I would say first 3 games, pretty light. And then it's really picked up since basically the last 5 weeks. They've played several, top 50, top 60 teams, and they've been able to win some of those games too.
Yeah. The one thing you can't fix, the one thing you can't change is the luck rating. And NC State, out of all the teams inside the top 30, I believe has the lowest luck rating of anybody. St. John's 338, and then Tennessee is 326. So those are the only teams outside of the top 300. NC State with a minus 0.09, which is just the margins of error. Like that tells you just how much the luck rating changes a little bit. They're at 336 in the country. So and that's changed a little bit even because the Ole Miss game and the last game before that, I think during the Kansas game we looked at it and they were like number 340 in the country. So that's something you kind of hope changes a little bit too here as the luck starts kind of turning for NC State and ACC play, and you don't have as many teams that just get somebody on fire from 3 that normally don't. Different things like that help for NC State too on the defensive end, and that brings me to the defensive side of the basketball. If I would have told you 3 weeks ago that NC State was going to be inside the top 50 defensively in the KenPom ratings, they're at number 41 overall in the country, I think most people would have been a little surprised. But as you mentioned, I think some people are just kind of looking at the outliers here and, the people who just went off, Kevin Overton, or, obviously everybody remembers Melvin Council going off. And then I can't remember who it was for Texas, but Another
Jordan Pope, I think.
Jordan Pope going off. And look, Jordan Pope is actually a pretty decent 3-point shooter, so it wasn't like an anomaly for him. And Kevin Overton, mentioned the fact that playing against Darian Williams, like it was a little bit more for him to want to, hit some of those deep shots. But, the defense has actually been good overall outside of those big performances, and that kind of goes into the luck rating too. Just your thoughts on what we've seen from the defense and what has kind of changed in the willingness for Will Wade and Brandon Chambers to change things for NC State, something that we genuinely like. I'll just kind of bring this back up too, by the way, something that we haven't seen in years, especially under Kevin Keatts, who strictly press, maybe backed off of press a little bit given the personnel, but was always going to be man-to-man. It was never going to be anything that was going to change. He wasn't going to go zone. He wasn't going to, switch things up. So just your thoughts on what we're seeing from this defense and the willingness from Will Wade and Brandon Chambers to kind of change things too.
Yeah, I think we talked about it sort of like post Maui before the Auburn game, or maybe it was right after the Auburn game, but you'd seen them through the Texas game. This State had been not exclusively, but had on the vast majority of actions that they were defending, exchanges that they were defending, their base defense was switching 1 through 5. And they mixed it up some. I mean, they've got a couple of different press looks that they'll throw out. They've got some half-court traps. They've got some half-court trap zone looks that they can get to that they'll throw in. And Chambers is like very creative. So is Wade, and sort of like their willingness to splice that stuff in. But they ran into a lot of issues with their sort of like willingness to switch. It put them in some tough matchups. It put them in some less advantageous rebounding situations. And not only was the State switch, they're very, very aggressive in showing early help. So you're going to see off-ball players, if they're guarding someone on the wing, the ball's in the middle of the court, they're going to be in the gap, like several feet off their guy, sort of like leaning towards the ball, near the elbow area. And when you do that, you can really like make it tough for a driver, but you also sort of like create some of these, kick out opportunities. And State's going to do that. Like they're going to keep showing help. They're going to continue to look for ways to try to like amp up the pressure. But while they continue to switch a lot 1 through 5, you are seeing them really, since the Auburn game, especially, like alternate their defenses, and they're doing a lot of like hard or high hedge with Lubin and Sanye when they're the 1-5 guarding the pick and roll. And that still puts your defense in rotation. I mean, you've still got to like scramble around on the backside and rotate around and close out and communicate. There's still going to be scram switches behind the play. Like there's still all of these like things you need to be able to like do. You're still going to be, in rotation. But I think that has given them some good looks defensively. And I think it's allowed them to stay out of some of these, again, less advantageous matchups, switching around and sort of ending up with a small defender on an opposing post and then having to like play out of that. And I think it also means there's just a little bit less sort of like scram switching on the fly behind things, which I think State has proven to be okay at so far this season. But if guys aren't having to do that as much, I think that probably helps a little bit as well too. Overall, they've actually rebounded pretty well, and I think that's going to sort of be a calling card for this defense, is the ability to rebound. And Lubin has rebounded well. Sanye has rebounded well. Paul McNeil has done a nice job from the guard and wing spots coming down to rebound. I'd be curious to see if they could sort of like force up that turnover rate a little bit. It's not bad. They've turned teams over on nearly 20% of their defensive possessions this season. It's not bad, but maybe you want to try to get that into the low 20s from a percentage standpoint, while also tightening up in the half court. When I look at their numbers and their statistical indicators, the one that to me is always sort of like the large red flag is the 3-point attempt rate for the opponent. Like State's offense, they take a lot of threes. 46% of State's shots on offense are threes, but nearly 49% of opposing field goal attempts this season have been threes. And obviously VCU, that game, they took like 2/3 of VCU's shots were from beyond the arc. So I do think like that's going to stay a high number all season, just sort of given State's willingness to switch and show early help and put pressure on the ball. Like you're going to end up sacrificing. You have to give up something, and they're going to give up a higher 3-point attempt rate. But there is like a bit of a delta between, you know, what the amount they're shooting, what opponents are shooting. And if opponents start to, you know, if ACC opponents, better shooters, start to hit in the mid 30s, the high 30s on those looks, like it could spell a little bit of trouble for them too. So want to always be sort of like mindful of that number, like the 3-point attempt rate and the 3-point percentage and the type of looks that State is giving up from beyond the arc. Not all threes are the same. You know, catch and shoot off a kick out is going to be more efficient than a pull up late in the clock. So context is certainly important here, but a number that I would like to keep an eye on. And honestly, like outside of the Texas game is like when things were like really bad defensively.
Yeah.
Obviously it wasn't great at Auburn, but Auburn also hit some ridiculous shots too. That's sort of
kind of what you kind of going back to what you said. There was several late shot clock, like all right, less than 3 seconds left to go. Yeah.
Overton and Hall with some prayers late in the clock. You don't want to like excuse it, but that shooting luck was not on State's side that night, whether they were going to win or not. They certainly were not helped in that regard. So, you know, look, a top 50 defense is like good enough if you're going to be a top 20 offense. Like that'll work. You know, that's a formula that should win you some games. But I do think State's going to have to continue to be versatile on that side of the court. I think they're going to have to change things up. I am encouraged by what lineups with Lubin and Sanye can do. You know, those two guys playing together give State a little bit more size. They get a little bit more rim protection on the floor. Even if it sacrifices some spacing offensively, it allows them to be a good defensive rebounding team. So I'm kind of curious to sort of like see those two play more together, and maybe that's something that can help boost State's half-court defense. Looking at the numbers, now they've played 34 minutes with Sanye and Lubin together, just 34. They're plus 21 in those minutes. Defensive rating of 102 points per 100 possessions, which is not too bad. And then the number to also really keep an eye on is their rebounding. 83% of opponent misses in those looks too. So, again, we talked about it the other day too. Sanye, like his ability to be a plus minus swing piece for State, and a guy that really helps boost their block rate, their steal rate, their rebound rate when he's on the court. And so getting him out there more, especially next to Lubin, I think has the chance to grease the wheels defensively a little bit.
Yeah, one thing I was going to add too is it's interesting because I know kind of the pushback for people with Paul McNeil getting more minutes has been the fact that he hasn't been very good defensively and, you know, has struggled a little bit in on-ball defense. But you bring up a good point, the fact that his rebound rate is so good. You know, he especially on the defensive end of the floor, he helps from that side of things. And then the same thing with Moussa Sanye. You know, yes, his offense has not been great. It's been the opposite for Moussa, but his defensive rebounding, his overall defense, and the fact that, you know, you mentioned, I think in the last one that we did, like the fact that teams just aren't going inside as much when Moussa is there. Like they're shooting more from outside. They're taking worse shots. So they just don't want to go inside as much on him. And if you can put him and Vinal Lubin out there, then you offset some of the offensive issues that you have with Moussa Sanye, and you offset some of the defensive issues that you have with Vinal Lubin, having the two of them there. Then the question mark is if you have both of them out there for, you know, 15 to 20 minutes together, then where do you put Darian Williams? Do you put him at the 3? Do you keep him there? And I think that's kind of where it's like, all right, where do you move things around? And, you know, also what do Terrence Arsenault and Jerry Ding's roles look like moving forward? I think it's going to be the big question mark is, are they able to work their way back into the rotation? Are they able to work their way back into the, you know, I guess we'll say the trust circle of Will Wade, because he literally said after the game against Ole Miss, like, I played the 7 that I'm going to play a ton. because I trust them. Those are the players that I trust right now. And it just doesn't have that in those two right now. So I'll be interested to see what the rotations look like once we get to ACC play and how much that changed. But I agree with you. I think, kind of putting Musa a little bit more out on the court just because of what he gives you from a rebounding rate and defensively can help a lot, especially when you have Vanilla Lubin out there too.
Yeah, look, Sagne has played 188 minutes this season, so it through 13 games. So this is but State with him on the court this season, outscoring opponents by 40 points per 100 possessions. They have a block rate of 14.3% with him on the court. That goes down to 8.9% with him on the bench. They have a steal rate of 15% with him on the court. That goes down to 9.5% with him. So like huge, 5.5% swings with him on the court in terms of blocks and steals. Their defensive rating with Sagne on the court this season, 89 points allowed per 100 possessions. With Sagne on the bench, again, a much larger sample, allowing 110 points per 100 possessions. So a difference of basically 20, 21 points per 100 possessions. So those numbers are going to stabilize a little bit and not be quite as sort of like jarring. But so far, with this guy playing and including minutes with Van Allen Lubin, like he's proven to be a guy that can really influence blocks and steals. And that shouldn't be that itself shouldn't be too surprising because he is, maybe Scotty Abube, but my guess would be Sagne is probably the team's best rim protector. And for a 6'10", 230-pound guy, he also gets a lot of steals too. 3.5% steal rate, 17% defensive rebound rate, 6.5% block rate. So again, there's reasons to, I think, buy into him as being like a valuable piece. And he's plenty, he's switchable. He can guard different spots. And if you have him and Lubin playing together, again, you can really lock down the glass. You can hard hedge Lubin and have him, hedge out at a ball screen 20 whatever feet from the rim, knowing that Sagne is going to be on the backside, right? Giving you rim protection if the offense gets into 4-on-3 situations, or vice versa. Then you'll have Lubin at the rim while Sagne is blitzing the screen, away from the hoop. If you're switching 1 through 5 and you switch Van Allen Lubin out on an opposing point guard, and all of a sudden you've got Trey Holloman, matched up against the opposing center, well, then you can scram switch. But instead of having Darian Williams or Paul McNeil or, Terrence Arsenault, these guys that are like, 6'6", 6'5" wings that are going to scram switch behind the play, you're going to have Moussa Sagne come over, and he's going to, all of a sudden, you're going to have a 6'10" shot blocker on the opposing center, or vice versa with Lubin, and then you can kick out Holloman or Breed or whomever to guard, an opposing, 3 or 4 or something like that. So it just makes them a little bit more versatile, and in the added length in ground coverage with Sagne is, I think, something to take note of.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll offer is kind of an offset to that. You mentioned the steal rate. He did end up with 4 of those in the first game against NC Central, which was a blowout win. So
yeah,
the steal rate might not be as high if he didn't have those. But also, kind of back to your point too, like where he just hasn't had a lot of games against the better competition. KU. That game, he played only 6 minutes, even despite it going into overtime. Texas, he only played 4 minutes. Boise State, it was a win, but he only played 7 minutes in that one. Auburn only played 11 minutes, and then Seton Hall, he only played 10 minutes. So I go back to one of the biggest wins they've had so far against VCU. 27 minutes he played in that one. So, and that was a game where, yes, he only shot 33% from the field, but ended up with 6 rebounds, ended up with, a block in that game. So, like those types of things you're starting to see, can kind of shift the way that NC State's able to play defense. And you hope to see him get a little bit bigger of a role moving forward. All right. Last thing for you, looking ahead to the ACC schedule. Obviously, things have shifted. 18 games now at this point. NC State starts with 2 games at home, 2 games on the road that I think are both winnable situations. Boston College obviously has really struggled this season. And then Florida State has not gotten off to quite the start that they were hoping for. So far, 7-6 on the season, but they have been 7-1 at home. So it is still a tough team to beat at home. Granted, they haven't played great competition at home either. So, but I'm looking at the first 5 games for NC State in conference play. Outside of Virginia, who's a ranked opponent, but that will be a home game and a weird time. It tips off at 11 a.m. in the morning for some reason. But you look at the first 5 games; those all feel like winnable situations for NC State to really get off to a strong start. It's the back half of the schedule, going to Louisville, playing UNC at home, playing Virginia on the road, playing Duke at home, and then closing things out with Stanford, who's actually looked surprisingly good so far. And Stanford, getting off to a 10-2 start to the season. Just your thoughts on the way this kind of all shakes out and what you see for NC State in ACC play, kind of where they stack up in the ACC heading into this thing.
Yeah, Stanford has a freshman guard, Ibuka Okori, who, if you haven't seen him yet, is legit. I mean, he's going to be an all freshman team guy. I actually saw he went to Brewster, which obviously State is a program that State has recruited before in the past. He played with Sebastian Wilkins up there, who's at Duke now. And smaller guard, but super quick and really tough to stop in the pick and roll. But yeah, sort of like looking at the immediate schedule the next, few weeks when they get back from the short break. I mean, Wake is a pretty good team too. I do think with sort of like the fact that they kind of have like a little bit of a smaller backcourt, like they were either playing Calmise or Akins, like I'm sure that Colt Copeland's going to try to have a big game. I'll be curious to sort of see how Wake toggles the matchups. Wake's got some players though too. Like Juke Harris is one of the best players in the conference. He sort of like Paul McNeil, like an in-state guy from the state of North Carolina that's had I think a pretty predictable like breakout sophomore season. Like you could have seen it coming if you watched them play last season. And then Miles Colvin, the transfer from Purdue, who's super athletic, can drive, is shooting a good ball from deep this year. They've got some pieces. So I see that's going to make for an interesting matchup in different ways. Those are two teams that both play very fast offensively too. UVA is going to be tough. Like if anyone's curious for like a deeper breakdown on them, I wrote a long piece on Virginia published at Basket Under Review last week, but really good freshman point guard in Chance Mallory. They did an excellent job in the portal. Like I would say, I think we probably talked about it in the offseason, Corey, but like I would say like UVA and State probably had like the best, among the ACC teams, like the best hauls in the portal. I mean, they totally reset the roster. They've only got one returning scholarship player, Elijah Gertrude, who's coming off an injury and he doesn't really play that much for them. But to bring in Malik Thomas, Dalen Hall, Devin Tillis, to go to Europe and get guys like Johan Grunlow, who's one of the best rim protectors in the country. They're tough. They play drop coverage. They sit in the paint. They protect the rim, and they play fast and can be explosive offensively. They did not play great against Maryland the other day, but that's a really good team. And they're going to be tough, but that's an opportunity for State. And it's like, if you can get through those 2 games, I mean, if you could somehow win those 2 at home, then you got the next like 2 weeks to really try to like stack wins. You can try to pick up a win in front of the 8 fans that will be at the Conti Forum when you play Boston College.
It's sleepy environment, man. They're tough.
Yeah, tough. I mean, at least that's like a Tuesday night game and not like, I sometimes feel like when it's like a 12 or a 2 o'clock start up there, and like on a January
Saturday.
It's like those are always like a little tricky. FSU's playing insanely fast. Like Luke Laux has them. They're one of the fastest teams in the country. They take a ton of threes. Has definitely brought his sort of like NBA. He was an assistant with Golden State and with Sacramento, and has really brought that sort of like pace and space to Tallahassee. But they just don't really have like the talent offensively. I mean, Cam Miles is a nice freshman guard. They've got some other good players on this roster. Chauncey Wiggins, who transferred in from Clemson, LeJay Jones, who transferred in from St. Bonaventure, that are good players, but a team that just offensively, despite the 3-point volume in the pace, to me, Laux is just sort of like trying to set the foundation for how he wants to play, but he just does not fully have the pieces to get there. And then just Georgia Tech too. Like, I mean, this is a team that it's been like kind of an issue. I mean, losing to DePaul, losing to Drake, Mississippi State. Those are some tougher losses. I don't know how things are going with Damon Stoudemire. You know what I mean? In down on the flats. Bayadongo, I believe, has missed time for them this season too, which is tough because he's their best player. But just they offensively, they don't really have the pieces. I mean, it's a pretty tough watch for them on that side of the court too. So, if you're State, you're hoping if you can win those first two, then why not get to 5-0 in conference play? On a 7-game win streak, staring down a tough road game at Clemson, a month from now. We'll see, but I think there's a chance for them to get off to a good start, but it certainly will not be easy. Wake is a good team, and UVA is like potentially, I mean, UVA might be the third best team in the league this season. Third, maybe a little, they're probably the fourth best, but they'll be in contention, with Louisville, for that. And State's sort of like in that mix too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's who you're kind of contending against right now, is you got to get over that hump of beating, either a Louisville, a Virginia, a UNC, or a Duke, because those are kind of the teams that people are projecting as the top four of the ACC. If you want to get in the top four, if you want to be, around that area and try to get into a double bye situation, those are the types of teams you need to beat. Looking at Ken Palm's projections, he has them at 20-11 finishing and 11-7 in conference play. The losses would be at Clemson, and then he has at SMU, at Louisville, at UVA, and the only home loss in conference play would be against Duke. And he has them winning against UNC, 59% chance of winning that. So obviously these are all early projections, and those things will shift, as NC State plays these games. He has NC State actually winning the first 5. So and over a 60% chance in every single one of those, Virginia being the tightest one. And like I said, the loss at Clemson potentially. But these are all, I mean, those are kind of the games where it's like, all right, you've got to win a couple of those road games. If you could beat Clemson on the road, or you can beat SMU on the road, then you're kind of playing with house money at the end of the season. Yes, Louisville, Virginia, Duke are all going to be really tough matchups, and obviously UNC will too. But I think this team, a 12 win, conference schedule, getting to 12-6, being at 21 wins overall, I think probably gets them into the NCAA tournament, and I'm sure we'll probably break much more of that down throughout the coming weeks as we see what NC State's able to do in conference play. But we'll talk about all of this again another time. But Brian, I appreciate you for jumping on and breaking all of this down with me. And we'll talk much more as NC State actually gets into conference play after the Christmas break. So thank you for jumping on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, safe travels to everyone. And looking forward to conference play in 2026.
Yes, sir. Happy holidays to each and every single one of you. Merry Christmas. We will talk to you guys again.